Hey, how's it going, guys? My name is John Park and welcome to this tutorial. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so for the format of this tutorial, I'm going to work around 3,500 pixels. It's going to be wide landscape. And I went ahead and I picked out some photo reference here. Mainly a lot of this stuff is going to be used for textures, even used for silhouettes and referencing for some of the posing that we have here. This is going to be a relatively straightforward demo here. I'm going to go ahead and start with, just laying out some basic compositional ideas by sketching it out. A lot of this type or this way of working, I like to just kind of think about just shapes, not necessarily any specific points, but mainly all about kind of the gesture of the image. Now, because the image is so filmic and it's very landscape, I do want to break it up in a way that's kind of more following the rule of thirds. Excuse me. And what I mean by that is that a lot of the weight of the frame or the way it's shot is that it's not going to be centered. It's going to be either on 1/3 of the image plane, or it's going to be on the other 1/3, because I kind of wanted to have a sense of dynamism and just something interesting. I know a lot of times it's really easy to fall into setting up your composition so that it hits directly in the center, but I'm just trying to be mindful of my general shapes here, so that when we get into the actual painting phase, we can actually just go ahead and block things in. So I'm just thinking about shapes, not necessarily any specific details. Again, just thinking about like whether these can be rocks or these can be kind of, some sort of plant or some sort of like a canyon type of deal. Maybe this can be some vertical kind of structure here. And just trying to draw in. And notice how the lines that I'm drawing are compressing here. You see that? The reason why I did that, and I'm also creating a gesture here, but the reason why I compress the lines there is so that it has a sense of perspective. The other gesture that I'm keeping in mind is I do want to lead the eye. I want to swing the eye from the right to the left, all the way back to the right again. So I'm using this big rock right here as kind of our foreground element to really drive and help us kind of look over to where the guys and the horses are. Alright, just going ahead and just kind of washing in, or I guess blocking in the shapes here. And I'm just thinking about just pure grayscale at this point, just so that it's easier for for me to kind of just manage the entire image here. Starting to think about like some of the smaller shapes here. And again, we talked about a little bit about that compression. As this rock wall goes away from us, the textures are going to compress only to show off the textures here. So that's kind of what I'm doing right here at this moment. And I'm just thinking about like maybe some really loose shadow shapes. And clearly, like the brush strokes that I'm adding in, they're really rough. They're not really designed or thought about. I'm just thinking about like placement of where the shadows would belong. Okay, now we got some of this stuff going on here with the actual textures of these cowboys or these guys on the horses. Um, and I'm gonna use blend modes or use the magic wand tool. Now I typically like using any method to kind of help separate the values out as best as I can. And I'm just gonna compose them right next to each other based on the sketch. And this is great because we already have a lot of our silhouettes in. And again, like a lot of times, I would normally paint this stuff in, but then just trying to get the pose and everything accurate, it's just why not just use an existing silhouette? Just kind of get it working for you. Just gonna glaze this guy here and this guy here just to kind of show a little bit of depth and distance. And again, just thinking about like, okay, if these guys are back here and they're that value, then definitely the objects that are closest to us, like the rocks, are probably going to be darker. So I'm going to go ahead and I created a layer on multiply, and I'm just going to darken it down. And put this on normal. Let's go ahead and duplicate this here. Normally, or I guess what I always like to do is I'll do a rough sketch, and there's a lot of opacity. It's very transparent, but what I like to do is I always like to duplicate the sketch so that I can get kind of more of an opaque layer. And that's kind of what you saw me do here just a moment ago. Again, just to kind of like block everything in, and you can see like it's coming together pretty, clearly. It's still not resolved fully, but you can kind of get the feel of the riders with the rocks kind of being composed. Everything is still relatively loosely indicated, but we're just starting to get some things in. I'm gonna go ahead and start colorizing a lot of this stuff just based on some color palettes that I think might work. This is just more of a wash. I'm just thinking about maybe just some basic tones. Nothing that's going to be really finalized, but just thinking about like maybe what could be nice for the ground. I'm also going to use my handy pattern stamp tool here. And I like to use this on overlay and soft light just to get some variety and vibrancy of color here. If you guys haven't seen or used this technique, I will have a little demo at the end of this tutorial on how to create your own textures, so be sure to check that out. Now I'm going to go to my photo reference here and pull this texture because it's pretty awesome. I'm going to go ahead and hide all this other stuff. Thinking about maybe just selecting the sky, seeing what we can do with it, and maybe this ground here is pretty cool, and maybe this stuff here as well. These are some really nice rocks. Again, when I typically look for reference, I always look for just shapes, not necessarily specific locations or things like that. I just look for pure shapes. This might be cool right here on this side. Let's get rid of the sky. And go ahead and match color this value. Match color is an adjustment mode under image, it's really handy for just trying to get some variety of color here. So I usually use this mode to just kind of find a nice palette for my texture here. And again, this texture really serves for a couple of things. It's the grittiness of the surface, but also it's a lot of it's kind of the colors. You know, there's a lot of nice colors here. I'm gonna use this rock here. Pretty nice. Maybe up along the surface. Alright, let's go ahead and make just a selection. I want to try to get this embedded properly. I was thinking maybe I can just put underneath and link it into the layer here. Let's go ahead and duplicate this just so I don't mess up. I'm going to go ahead and collapse these two layers, and then I'm going to link this texture in. The reason why I linked it in is because I want that silhouette. You see how that silhouette there kind of notches in? Because I don't want the silhouette of the actual photo. I want the silhouette of my sketch. This ground plane here, I'm going to go ahead and lighten up just a little bit, and maybe desaturate, because I do want the textures to kind of pull through there. Use my handy lookup table here. Color lookup is also another great way of finding colors, just like match color, but this uses presets where you can figure out exactly, you know, what kind of colors work for you in these modes. And I think it uses just algorithms of sampling the value and also the hues, and it just kind of compensates for it, and it makes those adjustments. Alright, just going ahead and I put the texture on a mask, and I'm just gonna start to kind of reveal a little bit of the texture underneath, so that, you know, it's not completely overwhelmed by the texture, but I can actually control the amount of how much of the photo actually comes through. You know, sometimes you kind of want moments where you want the photo to come through, and also you want moments of where you just want it to kind of breathe as a sketch. I just create a new layer here just so I can kind of blend things in. I definitely want this side, the left side here, to kind of remain a little bit more looser and ambiguous. I'm going to start designing some lighter shapes here, just kind of resembling rocks on this side of the plane. As it compresses, I want it to kind of receive a certain amount of light. It would be indirect light, so the lighting on the surface here will most likely be a little bit warmer. And this texture here that I just quickly pulled up, I'm going to go ahead and actually do a color lookup and just kind of match it to what I had in the previous one. Something of maybe of this nature here. It's kind of nice. Again, you can use color lookup, you can use match color, and also you can definitely use you know, modes such as, you know, just you can do things manually using curves or hue saturation. But this is just a really nice way to kind of quickly embed things. And some of these rock shapes are just beautiful. So I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of loosely sample this stuff out. blow it up here, and I'm gonna hide it using a mask, and I'm gonna start revealing it. Let's go ahead and use a softer brush here, and let's just go ahead and start glazing on top of the areas of where we want it to, where we want that texture to show through. Again, you know, when you're using photos, guys, photos will never really answer all of your problems. It's more of like a halfway point. You know, it'll meet you halfway to your illustration, but you really have to figure out how you're gonna let it work for you. Because you don't want to be a slave to your photos, but you also don't want to, you know, let the photos just kind of dictate every single part of your image, because you know that'd be a complete waste, right? I mean, that wouldn't really be, you know, a creative painting process. Even though I've seen really well executed, you know, paintings using a lot of photos, but the artist always thinks about kind of the way the entire image is being composed and utilized. So as I'm blocking in these elements here, I'm just thinking about, okay, what are some really good spots and what are some areas where I can definitely just kind of eliminate or edit things out. Because there's a lot of really nice moments here, like this rock shape is really cool, and maybe tied in with some of the other rock shapes down here below. But again, you know, does it work for my composition? Does it help my composition read? That's always been kind of the trickiest thing, is you find a really awesome photo, but does it help with your shot? You know, sometimes just because you have an amazing photo doesn't always make your painting amazing. It's kind of like the analogy that I always use and remind myself is, you know, it's like if you take every single good part of a movie and you bash it into one, you're not going to necessarily have a good movie. You know what I mean? Just because you have every single, you know, all the good elements and all the good ingredients of every single movie that's come out, you're not guaranteed to have a good movie. The reason being is that a good movie has a balance. A good movie has moments of quietness and moments of eventful moments and chaos. You know what I mean? So just like a painting is going to have moments of kind of it being really quiet and moments of it being really obstruct and just kind of having a lot of frequency of detail. So that's kind of the point that I'm making. But I'm going here and I'm actually using the mixer brush here, and the mixer brush is really fun. If you guys haven't tried it out, it's something that I picked up from looking at like Craig Mullen's demos. A few other people have been using it as well. Such a great way of just kind of creating some really nice loose textures. It works very much kind of like a smudge tool, but a little bit more I guess creative, in the sense that it samples some of those things, some of the colors a little bit better. And I'm just gonna use a smart blur here to just kind of kill the frequency of detail here, because again I just want the colors and not necessarily the, you know, all the textures here. Just created a layer and I blurred it a bit. Use a soft brush, just kind of take it away a little bit and continue painting. I think the most important part here, I'm just trying to figure out, okay, where are my shapes? Where is gonna be my composition of rocks? Because before, if you think about the photo that I took, it had a really nice texture, but again, compositionally, it doesn't work for my image. But color-wise and texturally, it definitely fits in the realm of my image. So I have to figure out the composition here. So let's go ahead and create a new layer. And I'm just going to put in maybe a large rock foreground. Or something. It needs something here. I'm going to compress this here. Maybe the background, the ground plane that they're standing on, is going to be much brighter. So I'm just going to go ahead and reveal some of that texture here. Using a soft brush, I'm just going to go ahead and, or texture brush, I would say. I'm just going to kind of glaze it so that there's kind of a spot of light, a spot of high intense light here. Let's go ahead and group this. I love doing these types of sketches because it kind of it really gets me thinking about just pure composition and lighting and just trying to create story, really. I mean, honestly, there's not much, you know, anything else really exciting about this image. It's just two guys on a horse, right? So how exciting can that really get? But I like to really just think about like the juxtaposition of having this natural landscape, and just kind of how small they look, you know, by comparison. And there's just these two guys just riding out. And I'm just trying to kind of close in the left side here. Let's go ahead and upload some brushes. I totally forgot to upload some of my my brushes here. And you guys should have these ones. I don't know why Photoshop deleted all of my brushes. And you guys notice how I'm grouping things. Let's go ahead and redo this part. I think I lost a little layer here. But I typically like to just again, as I was saying, like kind of do these loose kind of compositions using kind of more of like a really simple and generic subject matter, because it's really about, you know, how and what can you make, you know, this image work for you, and how can you make it work for you? How can you make it look interesting? And that's kind of been, you know, the real kind of problem solver here is, you know, if you can make, you know, a simple image like two guys just riding on a horse, you know, and you can make that work for you. I mean, I think there's something really interesting there. I'm gonna go ahead and pull out my pattern stamp here, and I'm gonna use just some samples here. And again, in my pattern stamp tool, like I've uploaded a bunch of different textures and a bunch of different paintings, really, just to get some to reference color. And I like to work this way, just to kind of glaze in little bits of artifacts of color from paintings to photo textures and things like that. So really great way to kind of you know, blend things into your painting. Start thinking about some some of those rock shapes here. Again, like when I look at the when I look at these rock shapes, all I really see is, if you really squint your eyes, all you really see is just kind of a cluster of you know, gray and dark shapes. You know, there's no real sense of where the light direction is coming from. I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of make this rock a little bigger, but that's one of the things, is that like right now the textures are nice, but then again, compositionally and light composition wise, it's not really doing anything for us. So I really need to think about like, okay, well, if the light is coming through here, okay, this side of the rock is going to be definitely warm. Anything that's standing up, right, and not directly in light, the rock face is going to be a lot warmer. It's going to be a mixture of the local color of the rock mixed in with some bounce light that's getting from, like, you know, the sun hitting the ground. So that's kind of my justification for it getting a little bit warmer, or having like a tinted color per se. But the rocks that are directly facing the sun, I definitely want some light. You know, I definitely want a sense of light here. So I'm going to just kind of glaze a little bit of atmospheric perspective, but a little bit of light on these. Just going to show a little bit of the values as it goes away from us, getting lighter. This will give us an opportunity to figure out exactly how to carve the rocks as it gets closer to the frame. Maybe a little bit of red in the shadows here. Refer back to my sketch. I mean, we obviously can barely see the sketch, but just start thinking about some background elements here. So let's go ahead and just maybe color pick this and start indicating some trees or something back here. Obviously the guy's pointing, so he has to be pointing at something. Can't just be, you know, a gray sky. It has to be something interesting. I'm gonna go ahead and use my shape tool here, and let's go ahead and I just opened it up again and make sure I imported the right textures for these. I'm gonna bring in some tree textures. Again, this is something that was completely inspired by Sparth and his awesome, you know, magic. If you guys haven't heard of Sparth, be sure to look him up. He's an amazing painter, amazing concept artist, and also he is the art director over at 343. Just him and his team just produce some of the most amazing concepts there. But this technique is great for just kind of generating and starting off by adding in and thinking about just composition, but I'm thinking obviously composition using shapes of the trees. Darken the tree line here a little bit. Before my sketch, you know, it was just loosely indicated, but you know, once you add a little bit of context, it definitely starts to help. I'm gonna add in just kind of the sky, just to kind of feel it out. Not sure if I'm gonna completely keep the sky because it has so much detail and it's so contrasty. So maybe we can kind of brighten it up a little bit. But even then, you see how like it's kind of, I don't know if I really like the amount of detail there. So let's go ahead and I'm gonna sample the colors here. But I think I think I want to definitely add in my own sky value. So let's go ahead and paint something else here. maybe a much more simplistic sky. Just a band of light. Kind of low-hanging clouds or something. And I obviously want this to be very, not high contrast, sky with like all this detail. So I'm going to kind of knock a lot of this stuff down. Because compositionally, I want a lot of my details to be, where the rocks and the characters are. So back here, it's going to be pretty simple. A very, very simple looking background here. I'm going to compress this. Alright, so we're about 30 minutes into the sketch. And you can see how quickly we've kind of resolved a lot of the elements here. Just thinking about just the basic shapes. We got our textures in. We got a lot of our elements in. And now we're just kind of working in, refining the specific areas. Okay, so we got a lot of the basic compositional, gestures and all of the information in. Now I'm just thinking about like, okay, what else can I do? What else can I do to kind of make this image work for us? I'm gonna start using some texture brush to kind of smudge some of those details. We'll go ahead and kind of give this a stronger key light. And maybe, just maybe, we can get some textures and stuff in. Let's go ahead and resize these guys here. Thinking maybe we can just kind of separate them with just a tad bit. And maybe just add just a little bit more behind them. So I guess overall the gesture is I'm definitely happy with the overall gesture. I still need to put some more light and render up the guys on the horse just a little bit more, just so it feels a bit more integrated. Now here, where I'm adding a little bit more of the darker shadows here. Again, we talked about compression of detail, and so there's gonna be a lot of little crevices and darker pockets of shadow here as this rock wall is going away from us. So I'm just gonna try to design out maybe just some shadows here. Maybe just like a rock or something that kind of jets out. But notice how the details are getting smaller, right? So it's kind of a way that, compositionally I'm saying, hey, it's going further away from us, but also I'd like you guys to look here. So there's kind of a nice rhythm of detail that's kind of that is going away from us. Maybe just kind of kick some of this stuff back just a little bit. I'm just using the brush on lighten and I'm just kind of trying to push it back in terms of value. Alright. Let's go ahead and simplify just a little bit of this stuff here. This wall. make a selection here. I'm just gonna go ahead and make a rough magic wand selection so I can just kind of paint in some of these shapes. Again, it doesn't always work in every instance because you start to get some weird artifacting, and it kind of picks up like all these little pixels. But in terms of just getting a simple plane, I love using this technique just to kind of block in some general planes or general details. Again, just kind of working at this distance, I'm able to just quickly identify and see, like, okay, there's kind of a nice a nice shadow and light gesture, something that's allows my eye to transition from, you know, the foreground to the back of the wall to the figures. And again, anything that's close, that's kind of not in the focal area, I'm going to use really broad strokes, really simple large strokes here. Just going to refine some of the shapes here a little bit. And just kind of kick down a little bit of the light, because again, even light itself, we want to create a sense of composition. So the light on that back wall is probably going to be a bit intense. So let me look for a brush here. Just use another brush here to just kind of knock down some of this detail. Try to figure out maybe a little bit of the the rocks here. And again, I'm constantly bouncing around and just trying to see what I can immediately resolve. You know, there's still a lot of other things that I'm kind of, you know, mentally figuring out. You know, like kind of, oh, what do I put in the background? How do I make this bottom part transition better? You know, what areas could I simplify? What areas could I accentuate? So there's definitely kind of a lot of things that I do need to consider and juggle here before I just kind of, you know, make a definite or a strong decision on what is going to be in the foreground or whatnot, because I'm even still thinking about that as well. Even some of the rock shapes here, as I'm kind of blocking it in, like, oh, maybe there's a rock here jetting out, or maybe there's a rock somewhere here, you know. So there's a lot of things that, you know, that are at play, and you know, it's kind of like using this time to figure out kind of a nice balance of shapes. Maybe there's a rock that's definitely here. Just gonna go ahead and block that in. Let's go to our texture, texture 21. My naming convention is pretty wacky, by the way. I do apologize. You guys are probably like, wait, what? Why would you name it that? I think the way I started naming my brushes was purely based on, you know, first collecting, you know, one brush that was called A texture, and then from there I was just like, I don't know what else to name it, and I wanted everything to be grouped, because the crappy thing about tool presets is that you actually can't group them, so I have to group them based on the way it's named, right? The way you name a tool preset. So that's kind of the reasoning or the logic behind all that. Let's go ahead and actually sculpt maybe this rock here. And I have to make sure that the rock is relatively darker, because one, it's in shadow, and two, um, you know, I don't want it to compete with the back wall. The back wall is relatively going to be brighter, so this rock has to be a lot darker. Maybe just some rock shapes over here. You can see like how we're starting to build on top of this texture, right? So even though I wanted that texture to kind of remain as is, or, you know, have that photo just kind of be what it initially was, it was really hard for me to have it work for our image, just because, again, compositionally, it's like it doesn't want to really jive. It doesn't really want to you know, it doesn't really want to, like, you know, work together. That's the problem that I'm seeing here. I'm gonna go ahead and simplify this foreground here. I have some rocks that are slightly echoing, meaning I have similar shaped rocks here. So I'm gonna introduce maybe a larger rock plane. I'm gonna go ahead and simplify some of this stuff here, and open up some areas of breathing room, because a lot of that stuff is just kind of, it just feels like a large band. So let's go ahead and I'm actually gonna go ahead and darken this a little bit. Let's colorize this thing. It's looking a little too alienated from everything else. So I'm gonna say that the reflective light isn't necessarily as warm. I'm gonna say that the light over here is warm, but I'm gonna say everything that's in shadow here, if it is receiving light, it's gonna get a lot of fill light from the sky, so it's gonna be a lot cooler. So I'm gonna push a lot more cooler tones here, darker blues, things like that. Someone once asked me, like, oh, how come you always do like these cowboy paintings, or, you know, like, what's up with that, like, you know, why choose that as a subject matter? You know, I thought about that. I mean, growing up, I never really cared for cowboys and things like that. Like, I was never really a fan of that stuff. But I think when I started practicing, I didn't want to be necessarily driven by the subject matter. You know, I wanted the subject matter to be kind of something that was a little bit, you know, far less interesting. But I wanted to challenge myself and say, okay, well, I have a subject matter that's not as interesting. How do I make it interesting? You know? So it made me purely focus not on the concept per se, but more on the way I execute the image. You know, the way I can tell a story, or the way I can kind of you know, compose the image, compose the shot. You know, using cowboys, or using something really bland as an overall idea, to kind of help with my image making process, or my decisions as an illustrator, you know, to help make my paintings more interesting. Like, you know, what can I do to make it interesting? Can I think about shapes? Can I think about lighting? Can I think about composition? So it's because it's so easy for me to just be like, oh, I can make this scene about aliens, and there's these guys invading and shooting these monsters, and I'm sure it'll become 100 times more interesting to look at. But I think personally for me, it always distracts me away from just thinking about simple things like, oh, the rocks, or, oh, the composition, right? Because all my energy and all my time is now invested in the concept, and rather than all the other smaller things that kind of help kind of build it up. So it's a little strange, I guess, you know, for you know, a lot of people to think that way. I mean, I know I know a lot of my artist friends were kind of like, "What? Why do you keep drawing these cowboys, man? That's so weird." It's like you're usually the guy that always draws robots and stuff, and like sci-fi, hardcore sci-fi stuff. But I just think that I learned so much by drawing something that was so kind of boring to me, and it just made me think about like, all right, well, I kind of have this slightly boring image. How do I make it look interesting? You know, so I guess that was a real challenge. You know, that was kind of the thing that I was primarily focused on. And now when I look at paintings, I'm like, I look at, all the small things. I'm like, oh man, look at that sweet transition of the rocks, or beautiful lighting, awesome, man. And it can just be a painting about, you know a person that's walking down the street, um, and it's kind of like looking at artwork in a slightly different way, and looking at it more in terms of kind of the context of like what you're capturing, um, as opposed to like what it actually is. And I think both elements are very very important. You should definitely always think about the context, always think about the design, um, and not necessarily about the technical aspects or the principles of how light works. But for me, I've always kind of struggled with the principles of composition and lighting, and more the technical stuff that I wanted to just kind of take a moment to really try to harness and develop that more. So this is, again, I guess this is kind of my excuse to dive into that stuff a bit. Like every illustration, every painting has its own set of goals and challenges, and I know that this particular illustration, it was more about, how do I make this quiet moment look interesting? What can I do? What can I do compositionally? What can I do, you know, with just the lighting to make it look interesting? And man, does it help so much to have those silhouettes of those guys on the horses, because I think if there's anything that's really hard to draw, are freaking dudes on horses, man. I think horses are incredibly hard to draw. I'm sure some of you who are watching, you guys are probably professional horse drawers or artists, and you guys are probably like, dude, that stuff's easy, man. But I never drew horses. I just never got into, or have even studied the anatomy of a horse. So I'm easily impressed when I see people drawing horses, like it's nothing, because the anatomy of the horse and just the stance and everything is just so, it's so foreign to me. I'm just kind of like, how did you do that? That is awesome. So lots of things to learn. I mean, there's things that it's funny. I mean, I'm probably not as wild on hardcore sci-fi conceptual designs as I am on just simple things like how someone drew a really beautiful rock, or how someone was able to indicate cloth and metals in an interior room. It's really the small things that are starting to kind of really catch my attention. I think maybe because I've been drawing and doing a lot of the hardcore sci-fi stuff for so long, working in video games and things like that, that a lot of the it's a lot of the smaller stuff that's kind of like wowing me these days. It's kind of bizarre. I'm even impressed by paintings of just trees, and how someone can indicate foliage and ferns and plants, just so effortlessly. All right, so I'm gonna use a little bit of the pattern stamp tool again, to kind of bring a little bit of variety of color here. And I love using it just to kind of glaze and give just a little pop of color here to our characters, even to just kind of add and just give a little tone, is really nice. So I'm just gonna go ahead and just kind of paint on the arms. Because the silhouettes were done, I mean, it's really hard to fail at this. You know, if I mess this up, I mean, that's just kind of sad for me, dude. I mean, the silhouettes were pretty much done. I mean, I just got it from a photograph, and I left all the reference images for you guys to kind of look at and just kind of dissect. But you know, you can see directly, like, I just used those existing poses, and I just slightly alter them, maybe just by adding in a kick of light and maybe just a prop or two. But for the most part, I mean, it is what it is. You know, it's dude on a horse, another dude pointing his finger out. And if you look, as we zoomed in, now I'm starting to kind of refine the details a little bit, and you can just see, if you look at that brush stroke that's like right below us, that large kind of smudge of detail in the rocks, I'm literally not going to touch any of that. I don't want to refine that. The reason being is that that's kind of the brush economy that I want to leave. You know, I kind of want it to have a little bit of artistry there, and just kind of say, hey, that's all I'm gonna really do. The stuff that I am gonna really dial in on is just kind of the rocks that are getting closer to our characters, and also just some highlights and some information on the actual rider here. So I definitely want to indicate all this stuff here. The legs. There we go. It's all about just the light and shadow planes. That's all it is. And you're able to kind of describe so much. Alright, let's go ahead and add, let's see here, maybe some more simple light on the clothing. I don't know if that's too much. That might be a little too much. Maybe a little gun here. One thing I don't want to do is I don't want to add too much highlight on the character. I just want it just some areas. I'm going to go ahead and simplify kind of the background here, because it's getting a little too detailed for what it is. Because I did use the you know, the shape tool just to kind of quickly block that in. And I'm gonna go ahead and actually just start. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and group this. I'm gonna compress this stuff. So now I've committed. Now I'm saying, you know, I'm not gonna do any more photo texturing. I'm just gonna start painting, because I have all of my photos in. You know, I have everything that I need. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and start blocking in some of the foundation for maybe just kind of the way the road turns or stuff like that. Let's go ahead and add just a little horizon of water out here or something. Let's go ahead and lighten that up. we go. Now it looks like the guy's pointing to something. He's saying, there it is. There's the water. Right? Maybe there's a rock or something. He's like, yeah, we need to go over there. But maybe that, I think the masking on that is too similar to what we have with just some of the other shapes. So I'm going to go with much more ambiguous structure here. Let's make it just kind of a large mountain or something. And I'm going to go ahead and actually make a mask and just go ahead and paint out what we don't need. So I'm thinking about like just kind of creating a lost edge. I kind of want it to be more about, you know, just a really loose indication of what we see way back there. I'm just going to only reveal just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and darken the water a little bit and maybe bring it above so that we can see. We can clearly see the water line. Alright, turn on and off, just double check. I got my sky, got all these elements. Add in some more trees here. I'm gonna just kind of break up some of the edge details here. Maybe add another tree right back here. A lot of times when I break up some of the textures or some of the edge details, I always try to just smudge it out. It's just a really quick way to kind of you know, break that stuff up a bit, you know, without having to repaint or manually, you know, just trying to paint in all those loose details. So I just use the smudge tool to just kind of just artificially just kind of give it a nice blended look and feel. I added a tree here. I don't know if this was something that I wanted to try out, like maybe there's another closer foreground of tree, but it was just, again, competing too much with kind of what we have. So I'm going to go ahead and just knock this back and let it be a tree that's further in the distance. I'm just going to go ahead and let it just sit further back. And again, just kind of want to break up the textures of the tree just a little bit. All right, let's see here. Let's go ahead and add maybe just some, I'm thinking like maybe just some more like brighter like light hitting this area. I'm thinking like maybe we can get some indication of rocks or something, more rocks out here. Because it would feel kind of weird, right? Like you only have rocks that are on the wall, but nowhere else. Like, you know, I definitely kind of want a transitional area, so maybe just some slight hint of rocks out here. Maybe something. Just kind of sketching really loosely, sketching out some ideas. Maybe some sort of pathway or something. Maybe it's something out here. Follow the road, man. There's something out here, maybe. That's kind of cool. Again, like I'm trying to be, you know, clear about something, but not be too specific. Just trying to indicate some sort of general information there. right, let's just go ahead and start refining some of these little edge rocks where they're getting a little bit of light here. And maybe just over here I can just maybe pump a little bit more green or cooler values here. I think it might be kind of nice to have, just because there's so much warm and neutrals in the scene, meaning like there's a lot of grays and yellows and stuff. So I think we can just kind of contrast it, add a bit more blue here. I think it'll just help influence the vibrancy of the shot. I'm gonna go ahead and add just a little bit of sand, like a little pocket here, just because I feel like it's a little it's a bit dense with rocks. I mean, there's a lot of rocks here, you know. It's like, man, it's like I literally populated just this little section with rocks. So I'm gonna go ahead and just start, you know, giving a slight variation of areas where, you know, there's maybe pockets of rocks or pockets of sand, and, you know, grouped around areas where there's a lot of rocks. And even here, maybe. Start refining some of this stuff just a little bit. Just thinking like maybe there can be something here. Maybe like another rock or something. I think it might help, just to kind of help, you know, separate this area. It was just, I felt like it was getting just a little bit bland or just a little bit boring over there. So I'm just gonna add just some more areas of rocks and things like that. Maybe a larger form here, but still not too sure. I definitely want the right side to be more sand, so I should probably keep that area open. No, that, don't know if I want that. It seems like it's the same height as a horse's. It's funny because like when you're placing in simple things as rocks, now I'm like mentally focused on like, okay, it's the same size as the guys on the horses, right? So compositionally, it doesn't really help me. It doesn't really give me give me much. So that's kind of not working for me. Let's see here. Maybe a larger form. It starts to just get in the same height as those guys on the horses. It's funny. Sometimes, like when I add things in, I'm just kind of like, I just ask myself, like, how is that perfectly in line with, you know, some of the other elements here? You know, other compositional, you know, bits in the scene. It's just so bizarre. I think naturally, as our just the way we are as humans, like we tend to just kind of organize things in a way that's very even or very evenly distributed at least, you know. Add just maybe a little bit of maybe bounce light here, or just a little bit atmospheric. I'm just gonna push these back. Just so value-wise, you know, it's not competing. I definitely still want them to be pretty noticeable. So I mean, they're definitely the darkest object that's back there. So you know, they're definitely gonna pop. All right, now we're just a little bit over the 1 hour mark here. I've kind of basically laid down all of our shapes, a foundation of textures. We got all of the other elements in line here. Now we just got to focus on kind of stitching everything together, which that's kind of what we're doing right now. We're just trying to, you know, focus in on all the smaller bits and just trying to make sure that everything kind of has a nice balanced feel. I feel like the ground plane here, where the rocks are still not working, and it's just something weird about it. Like, it's not working for me. So I'm gonna go ahead and actually, you know, maybe just alter the composition of these rocks here. So I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of go back to this layer here and maybe just add or alter this shape a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and add maybe this piece here. And again, value-wise, I want to keep it darker, but I definitely want to introduce just some cooler tones here. Let's go ahead and erase this shape, because I feel like it's kind of echoing, or has kind of a bizarre shape. So I'm gonna just kind of cut into this a little bit, and we need to see the silhouette back there. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to another layer behind, and I'm just gonna simplify that back wall. So I'm gonna color pick this here. Go to a lighten. Oh. Maybe go to a screen. But I think a lighten might work the best, just because, you know, I definitely just want to add a lighter value here. It's gonna have to be a combination of lightening that back face of that rock, and also maybe even simplifying some of those shapes there. This gives me a much better idea of like how clear that silhouette of the rock is. You know, I obviously don't want it to be just kind of like a simple shape, but I want it to have some sort of form. Just kind of testing to see if the darker values work. It's not too bad. Maybe punch up this rock a little bit more. Just to give it a bit more contrast there. All right. Let's see here. Maybe scrub in some more softer details. Maybe just kind of smudge this area, just a little section of it, just a bit. Not too much, but that might be a little too much. Like sometimes, like when you have elements within your shot that are too sharp, it really becomes distracting because it starts to become an immediate focal point just because of how sharp it is, how much contrast it's creating. And whenever you have elements within your painting that's creating too much contrast, it generally means that, you know, either one, the values are too bright around that area, or it means that the shape is too strong. So this is where using the smudge brush or even dialing back the values will definitely work. So I kind of went ahead and I compressed this background a little bit because I definitely want to brighten up the background just a tad, just so that it doesn't have too many value variations. I just kind of want it to be simple and bright back there, just the amount of exposure that we have. All right, now time to really think about this area here. I'm just gonna go and use our mixer brush here. Let's go ahead and go to dry. Maybe this might work. It's kind of nice. It does some weird funky stuff, you know, like it kind of breaks it up, and it gives it a slight interesting aesthetic to the overall image. Oh, this is kind of cool. I'm gonna color pick this and just kind of simplify this area a bit. I'm still fairly new to, you know, the way the mixer brush works, but I know that if you sample all layers, it tends to get really laggy. So, you know, I always use just kind of the custom presets, like the dry heavy load or just the dry, and usually a lot of the brushes that you use will have a pretty big effect on it. So something with a bit more tooth will definitely have a different effect on it's just aesthetically how it looks, how it all comes together. And it helps to just kind of simplify a lot of this stuff here too. And I definitely want some sort of nice gesture here, but also something simple, because this part of the rock is really it needs to be pretty clear, but in order for it to be clear, what's directly behind it has to be relatively simple or easy enough to kind of read, you know, just by comparison. Maybe simplify this a bit, you know. And when I add in those shadow shapes, it's kind of like, man, it makes that area too complicated. You see how it immediately doesn't really feel good by adding in, it just becomes detail. Like those dark shadow crevices become so much detail, and it causes so much attention that it doesn't look good, you know. So I'm trying to find a nice balance here. Maybe this area I can maybe have a little bit more of an additional plane, just to emphasize again the perspective, right? Now rocks are really tricky to paint and draw. I'll tell you that. I mean, I've just by doing this one painting, I'm just my brain is on fire. Like I literally want to go back and do another series of these, because I felt that there's a lot of things that I felt that I did okay, and there's a lot of things that I'm just like looking back, I'm like, oh man, I wish I could have been a little bit more just a little bit more careful with just some of the placements of these rocks, and just kind of understanding, you know, how to make them a bit more convincing, and how to make them a bit more structural. Let's catch a little glint of light here, and maybe just some more light right here. Again, thinking about detail and compression and focal point. You know, again, a lot of the focal point in my area is going to have highest amount of contrast in terms of lighting, but also a lot of smaller shapes, a lot of small brush strokes. You know, so I'm using all these different illustration principles to kind of help you know, drive the viewer to look over here. I know that a lot of what causes interest is just contrast, right? So by adding a lot of light around dark areas, your eye is going to naturally want to look there. By adding areas of, you know, just even temperature shifts, like if this area is very warm by comparison, then everything else is cool, then we're going to look generally in the warmer areas, just because of how stark of a contrast it's creating. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of highlight here. Maybe just on the back of this horse, and maybe just on the shoulder. Let's see, where else? It's easy to go overboard with these little pings of light, you know. Like I remember when I first started, you know, adding this kind of rim light effect in my paintings. I actually added too much, and it started looking really spotty. And when I was learning this way of illustrating or painting, one of my instructors told me, you know, and he was being really sarcastic and funny, but he was like, did a bird just come here and take a shit on your painting? And I was like, wait, what? He was like, because there's a lot of white speckles everywhere, man. Like, what's up with this? That phrase has always stuck with me, like, and it's been like 10 years, man. It's been 10 years, and I still can't get that. I still can't get that phrase out of my head, that moment. So every time I add, you know, these highlights, I always think about what my teacher said. I'm like, am I adding too much bird shit everywhere? Now you guys are gonna start thinking about that. You're like, am I adding too much bird shit all over my paintings? But yeah, it was something that, like, you know, I got so excited about a certain application or a certain technique, right? Just like rim lighting things, and I was like, I just went banana cakes. I was like, oh, it's gonna be light here and rim lights here, and, you know, just too much, man. It's like you just want enough, you know, you don't want to go overboard with it. And that was just so interesting to me, like when I heard that phrase, because when I looked back at it, I'm like, yeah, that is straight up bird shit. There's a lot of stuff there, man. So definitely learn when to kind of pick your moments, because it's easy to go overboard and add all the flashy pings and things like that. going to start adding in a little bit of this plane here. Maybe slightly darken this area a little bit. Just again, I'm trying to add a little bit of that contrast. It might be a little too contrasty there, but I could probably dial down the highlights on that rock. But I definitely want to add contrast, so our eyes definitely you know, going towards that area. And you can see a lot of the textures that we started off with is pretty much not existing anymore. A lot of the smaller little moments here, all the little details is like, it's kind of what's really stitching this thing together. Because again, like, I think when we look at an image, we're gonna look at it, we're gonna look at the overall impression, right? We're gonna look at the thumbnail from a distance, right? And when you look at it, you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. What's over here? You know, and you start to kind of really dive into the picture. But by diving into the picture, we want to make sure that we cover all our grounds and have really refined areas versus areas of interpretation, or areas of looseness, just to kind of create a nice balance. Get some more of the sand right here. I noticed that the value of the sand, or the color, is actually kind of this red. So I'm going to add some sand down here. And it's actually kind of cool. I mean, it's giving us a nice different color here. I'm gonna add this sand in here. It's kind of more of a muted magenta. And obviously, when you have colors and shadow, it's actually going to appear a lot more saturated. Just because of the way, you know, the way colors, local colors, typically when they go into shadow, they get, obviously they get darker, right? But they also get very saturated, because it's not being influenced by any other light source. And when you have colors that are being affected by light, whether it's direct light, it starts to get affected, and it has to go through a filter, and it usually affects the saturation, and sometimes there's a slight hue shift. But you know, this area here, it's directly in shadow, so I'm most likely going to have these nice, slightly more saturated tones here. And obviously, the more shadow it goes into, the more it's going to be, you know, affected by the fill light of the sky. But I think this is kind of a nice balance here. Let's go ahead and, I was going to try to cool this down just a little bit because of the skylight. But I think that's kind of a nice, it's a nice red. I'm going to maybe put this over here. Maybe brighten it up a little bit. Add that in there. It's kind of a nice contrast. I mean, when I look at that, now it kind of feels, it feels like, you know, we added in some breathing room in between the rocks, and there's just something slightly different, you know. Again, this is all about creating contrast, right? So we've created another opportunity for contrast here, and funny enough, it's just the sand. It's kind of the magenta-y type of sand that we added here, that's making it feel and look interesting. I'm gonna go ahead and add maybe some more of that tone here. Just to kind of, again, introduce these nice tones in that area. I'm just gonna slightly erase away this area. It's a bit much. I kind of wanted more of a nice gradation, so I'm gonna use a soft brush, a soft texture brush here, just so it kind of rolls into that area. All right, guys, we're pretty much about wrapping up here. I guess if there's anything that I want to do as a last minute, it's just kind of maybe adding a little bit more refinement to some of these edges on these rocks. You know, just trying to add a little bit more cool light in these areas, just a little bit more. Maybe just kind of add a little bit more of a plane here, but also maybe just some slight ambient occlusion shadow here, just so that it's not just, you know, a rock with sand. There's a little bit of shadow just in that area, just so it's kind of slightly sitting. You know, you're gonna get these little tiny shadows here. Otherwise, it's gonna feel really cut out, and that's kind of the issue that it can create. Alright, let's see here. Any other little bit? I'm just trying to really figure out, like, is there any other elements, anything else that we're missing here? It seems like for the most part everything checks out. It's just like little tiny highlights, maybe. Like maybe we can add a little pocket of light here. Let it be very, very, you know, bleak and very bright. And again, I'm painting at a distance because I want to be able to kind of see everything. I mean, I'm just gonna slightly darken this because again, it was a little too dark. So I put this brush on darken, and I'm just kind of knocking some of this down a little bit, just so that you know, it's not creating so much of a focal point, because there is a lot of contrast there. Let's see what else. It's funny, a lot of the time that was spent here was really all the tiny decisions, you know, like all the editing. You notice within the first 20 minutes, within the first 20 to 30 minutes, we kind of had a lot of the foundation blocked in, but now it's just editing. And I'm actually I spend a lot of my time kind of doing this here, where I'm kind of picking moments and I'm just sifting through a bunch of just abstract paintings and textures that I've collected. You know, I like to, oh, this one's kind of cool, but I like to spend a majority of my time just finessing, and I think that's where a lot of time is actually spent in painting, is you're just finessing and just trying to get the image to work. Because, you know, the black and white sketch was established within the first few minutes. A lot of the colors and textures were pretty much established within the next 20 to 30 minutes. And then from there, it was just kind of a lot of back and forth, a lot of just kind of refining and tuning. And it's just really funny to me that, you know, a majority of painting, or majority of all the paintings that I've done, a lot of time is just spent doing that. I'm gonna go into blend modes, and I'm just doing this to kind of add a little bit of just color and variation here in the lights. And I'm gonna go ahead and painting white into it, so you can see just a little bit of light influencing this area, you know. And I just want to do it enough to where I'm getting a lot of nice little variety of pings and light. Obviously, you know, I have it on a mask here, so I'm able to kind of take away what I don't necessarily want. But I always use kind of this nice texture here, just to create little vibrancy of color. Like, look at that, that's great. Like, the amount of color that I'm getting there is pretty awesome. So I'm gonna dial down the lighting here and just find a nice little area where I can get these nice brush strokes and blues and things like that. I'm just gonna go ahead and just integrate them in. Kind of nice. It adds a little fun flair to the paintings. You know, adds a little bit of artistic, you know, I guess vibes, or whatever you call it. But I like adding all this stuff in towards the end. This is like all the little finishing touches. It's like sprinkling, you know, it's like putting sprinkles on your, or putting spices on your food. You know, it's like the tiny little things that kind of bring it to life. And then from here, it's just go on top and simplify, you know, take away some of the textures. And you notice, like, I copy merged this image like 17 billion times, but I always do that just to kind of to visually commit. And also, if there's anything I need to change, I'm just going to directly change on top of the image. Let's go ahead and actually add a little bit of color vibrancy here. I'm going to put this on overlay and just kind of add a little bit of warm here. But yeah, that pretty much concludes the demo, guys. If you guys have any questions at all, feel free to you know, shoot me an email or message me on Facebook. And I hope you guys enjoyed this demo. I hope to do more of this kind of stuff for the future tutorials. I just want to thank you guys again for taking the time to watch this tutorial, and you know, be sure to stick around for the tutorial for how to make the pattern stamp. And I guess I will see you guys in the next tutorial session. Thanks again. Hey guys, so I just want to show you guys kind of the process of creating textures when I'm using the pattern stamp tool. So what the pattern stamp tool is, basically it's underneath the clone stamp, and all you do is you hold it down, and it will actually come with very default settings here. And you'll notice I'll actually choose a brush here, and as you paint, you will see that it emulates, or it paints literally what's in this sampling right here. And now there's different modes. You can actually align the textures so that whatever you paint, it will basically be revealing basically what the textures are doing. Or you can put it on impressionist mode, and it'll sample the colors, and it'll give you kind of this craziness, right? So this is something that I use, and what I like to do is I always like to use my own textures. I'm going to bring up a little set here so you guys can see. And I like to import textures that I found, either, you know, things online that's ambiguous enough, or things that I've made, or I've scanned in. And I like using various textures for various reasons, because it gives you so much variety of shapes, color, and just grittiness. So this is something that I love to have you guys just try out. And I like to just create a bunch of textures in here and just kind of bring them in. And some of it can be really low res, it can be really high res. It doesn't really matter. It's just as long as the texture is cool, and it works for you. And a lot of times, if you have things like, you know, text here, you can always,
you can always kind of blend it out. But what's great about this is that I can now import this into my pattern stamp mode. So the way you do that is you go into the layer, you go into edit, and you go define pattern. It's going to ask you to name the pattern. You can call it like green, and let's go ahead and do another one. Define pattern, brown, and let's do another one right here. Define pattern, and we'll call this one blue. Okay, so we have 3 different distinct patterns that we've kind of imported here. And I'm going to go to my pattern stamp here, and you'll notice that there's 3 basically thumbnails that popped up here, and I'm literally painting with this. Now if you take it out of Impressionist Notes and paint, notice how I'm painting literally the pattern that I imported. This is just a lazy man's tool of importing patterns without having to drag it into your scene, but it's great to paint just to get a little bit of color and just some variety, especially when you're drawing and you're painting, as you've seen in my previous demos where we have an object here or a character of some sort and you want to import the pattern. A great way to kind of get some color, some variety, and just instant textures. So this is a great little tool that I've been utilizing in all the demos, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed the rest of the demo. Thanks.